Well, I'm back, and a refreshing change from election talk because Kit is back. Hello, Kit.
Hello, Keith.
How are you?
Very well, thank you.
Right, you've been away for a little while and you got stuck because of the bloody trains, but it's good to have you back.
Thank you.
And you've been mulling over the things that you want to talk about, and you've got a theme this morning.
Well, it occurred to me that one of the few optimistic signs for people in education is the fact that we may continue to be needed because of the way people in general, young people in particular, the way they actually gain experience, knowledge, insight, and so forth. The way, in other words, the way they learn. And I think if one starts to cogitate about that, it quickly becomes apparent that actually there is a need for somebody, even if rather in the background, rather hands off the tiller, there is a need for somebody to be in a guiding role, available to be turned to. On a Friday, a young colleague of mine noticed that I, just as a joke really, I often wear a bow tie on Friday, and he was having to go to a posh do and asked me to show him how to tie this tie. And this, I think, provided a very interesting instance of that. He had got hold of a couple of thingies on the internet where somebody was earnestly showing on the screen how to tie one of these blessed things. He'd also, from the tie he'd got hold of, again online, I think, he's a young chap, found one of those little diagrams printed inside, which are completely it doesn't bear any relation to the real piece of fabric.
I know. I've had my arms ache like crazy.
Yes. What the blessed does it mean by Luke 1? And I mean, this is an intelligent young man, a very intelligent young man, and yet he couldn't easily learn how to tie this thing, having never done so before, without somebody to help. Now, it's not that he wasn't capable of passing Luke B through, wrap over 1. It's that he'd never seen it done, never had it demonstrated, never had the feel of the actual tie in his fingers. And because I was able to alter the advice I was giving him by seeing where he was going wrong, in a quiet and I suppose slightly false, modest way, I felt rather pleased with myself that I showed him effectively how to do these things, and hope that he will have a clue as to how to do it in the future. That is a very trivial thing, but I think anything, whether practical or cerebral,
it demonstrates your point very well. Yeah. If I may say so, I am saying, because I'm not of the computer generation, is when I read instructions of various things, and it says go from here to there and so on and so forth, quite often I can get to the first 2 or 3 stages, and then it either stops giving me instruction or it gives me instruction in a language which I don't understand. And I really need somebody there at least the first time, if not several times, before I can get it myself. So, I mean, that demonstrates your point. But how would you make that a practical application in schools?
There have been lots of courses, including lots of theories put into action, into practice, in the sense that theories of learning, which is that one should try to acquire a skill, whether mental or practical, by finding out as much as possible for oneself, with somebody there to turn to. I think, for example, of the very successful but now out of fashion Nuffield course in science teaching, which came in the 1970s and enjoyed, even being the late 60s, and enjoyed quite a lot of popularity for at least 30 years. And it was I've heard somebody say that the reason it dropped out of fashion is because class sizes grew so much. And it wasn't possible for a single teacher with a class size of 38 to pay enough time to somebody who was quite effectively finding out for herself or himself, but needed guidance, and because everything wasn't being delivered, as it were, concurrently to all the learners, it just practically became impossible to do it. And I think that's a great shame, and I think any education policy that breaks these big classes down into smaller groups, at least for some of the time, will allow that kind of explorative instinct in the learner to be assisted by a guide who can spend a significant amount of time answering their questions and demonstrating how they could improve their mental or practical techniques. It's all a question of being able to arrive at a much better proportion in numbers between educators and parents.
Well, now, tell me this, Kit, because everything moves on, but quite often we find that things do fall out of fashion or they start to be disused for some reason, and then somebody discovers them and goes back, but refines that system to meet modern demands. How would you? I mean, would you just simply go back to the Nuffield system and apply it to the arts as well as sciences, or would you say, look, in theory, it's a very good idea to have this assisted learning, if I could call it that, but what we can do is we can adapt it to modern teaching. Which would you do?
I don't see that the two are mutually exclusive, to be honest with you. And I think if we take art in its purely narrow sense, that we're talking about fine art or plastic arts and so on, that's never gone away. A practitioner will have demonstrated, maybe talked about, maybe shown some resources of different examples of working a particular artistic medium. And then the student has always had the opportunity to experiment and develop their own techniques and skills with somebody just monitoring what they're doing, making suggestions, which I love the fact that those intensely practical subjects in school are still like that. And I don't see how they could really be very different. Drawing, I know, has sometimes been a little bit prescriptive because there are things that it's good to know the basics of things like getting texture through hatching and things like that. So, yeah, but I think that that can extend to most things. I'm not saying that one simply gives, as it were, in any subject, the metaphorical box of paints and a bit of paper and say get on with it. I think it needs guidance at the outset, and it needs the existence of guides and mentors and advisors, including interaction between peers in the student to be able to develop individual skills.
Okay. Now, I suppose what I'm really getting at is this.
It's not my answer. No, I was aware of that.
I think that answer was very important. What you did was you took a specific, and we've got an answer to that. But as you say, the Nuffield system dropped out of fashion. And to bring this sort of assisted learning, that's my best way of describing it, assisted learning, back into the stream of schools, is you've got a whole generation or even two of teachers who are not used to this. So how would you actually go about, I'm the Minister of Education, and you say, look, I want to bring this back into schools. And it's been practiced for some time. This is what I would propose.
The point is that it hasn't gone out of practice. It's got a bit rusty. Even the most modern teacher fresh out of training college has that technique in their armoury. Because however set and prescribed the introduction of, let's say, a scientific principle, however much the group are all together in experience in witnessing some sort of practical experiment, however much they're tramlined, if it were, into the way they're expected to draw conclusions and write them up and learn from them. However much that is the case, each individual student will want to ask the leader, the tutor, teacher, lecturer, whatever it is, for advice. Am I doing this in the best possible way? Is this another possible way of doing this? And so every teacher has to have that skill, which is a very basic human skill. It's the way our entire culture has always been transmitted, that somebody, usually but not always, a little bit older, makes themselves available for a learner to go to him or her and question whether what the learner's doing, the way progress is being made, is the best possible. And a discussion will take place. It still does. And it's only a question of getting the bellows on that little flickering flame and getting that to take over a bit more of the fireplace and a bit less of the I don't want to be dismissive of box ticking, but there is far too much of it in education today and other walks of life as well, I think. So for that reason, I feel optimistic about the future of my profession, if I can call it that. Quite often when, particularly when I'm not familiar with the subject, so I can be anywhere near an expert, I say I come from a position of ignorance. So if I seem to be sort of being persistent in one line of questioning, forgive me. But for instance, in the very brief time that I did some lecturing at a college in Notting Hill of all places, I was teaching media, but I very much did the practical hands-on. Is let's not just talk about documentaries. Let's actually make a little documentary. And I would say I use the show and tell technique. And quite often students would say, God, Keith, except they didn't call me Keith, but nobody's ever done this with us before. So although you say that teachers are embodied with these skills, if it's not in fashion, it's not always used. Short of using a whip, how would you bring it back into the mainstream? It's rather like reintroducing an endangered species, I think. It certainly hasn't, it's on the red list in some subjects, and I'm afraid to say in some schools as well, where the children are subjected to 6 one-hour lectures of somebody standing on their handlegs talking at them. And I think it's got its place. It certainly has got its place. So yeah, let me just deal with that point. It's just flickered into my fevered brain for a minute. It still does have its place. Somebody lecturing, and part of the reason for that is that squishes anybody who says, "What's the point?" Because they could just read it. Why does it need Professor X or to think that he has to be the one to talk about 17th century coinage? No, it isn't the same. The difference between a flat text on a page and a human being delivering a subject in which they have an expertise is very different. Anyway, I'm just talking about a change in proportion. I'm certainly not saying that there is absolutely no place for telling people about subject knowledges. I just think that it needs to be played down, and that investigative and exploratory methods need to be much more in place. It isn't just to do with education either. Fashion in education is to do with humanity. How did our ancestors learn tool making? How did they learn agriculture? How did they improve things like rearing children, language, conveying language and so on? It wasn't by lecturing, it was by demonstration, guidance, and answering queries and questions and clearing up difficult and trying to put somebody's mind at rest when they've met with a difficulty by trying to approach the problem that they were perceiving from various different directions to help them through. And best teaching practice will involve that, still does. I just think that there needs to be an awful lot more of that, and rather less of this is what you have to do to answer this question and get that mark, which I'm afraid to say is the fashion at the moment in education. Marking grades. I'm really being a pain in the backside, pushing this. Just my experience is that unless something is being used constantly, sometimes people don't understand what they've got to be able to achieve. I'll give you an example. I spent a lot of, I lived in Northern Ireland for 15 years. And in one of those periods, as I did some PR for British Airways, who were having a particularly bad time, and because they were British at a time when being British wasn't totally fashionable. And in asking me what I would do, and I said, well, you've got airplanes. Why don't you put the bums in seats so that they get the feel of the airplanes and so on? We never thought of that. In other words, they got the facility, the resource sitting there, but it sort of blocked out using it. Now, it is a similar sort of thing in education, is that there are resources there that teachers are looking at, but not totally understanding that they can apply. Without a doubt. That there is great work going on in many schools. There's I've forgotten which school, and I've forgotten where, and I've forgotten quite when. But in the last couple of years, there was a big celebration of the way modern languages are being taught in a series of schools. I think it's a linked series of academies. And it was very much using the methods of people who want to learn a language, adult learners wanting to learn a language and applying it to children, which very often is a mixture of the donkey work of learning the structure of the language and, most importantly, immersion in conversation, in listening and replying and speaking, reading aloud. those sorts of methods. Yes, the resources are there. You know, we've got practitioners available to us for all our neighbours' languages, and many languages around the world. It's not difficult to find an Italian speaker, for example, or a Portuguese speaker, or a Polish speaker. It's not hard to get the resource, if you like, in front of the learners, so that we can be immersed in it in the same way that your acquaintances in Northern Ireland got their backsides on the aeroplane seats. But it's it certainly brings things to life. Now, I'm sure, like me, you remember the bits we remember about our science lessons are the whiz-bang experiments. That's what excites youngsters about science. And it isn't the demonstration of formulae that goes afterwards. So, yeah, absolutely. It's crucial. It's crucial. There isn't a subject, however dryly taught it has been in the past and still is, that doesn't have the capacity to give people proper experience. And it's so important.
Now, you're very articulate, even passionate about this form of teaching. And in fact, you've been almost offensive if I suggested it's not there. And you said, no, hang on, it is there. But what caused you to say to me, I'd like to talk about this if you don't mind? Because you obviously think that there is a deficiency somewhere that needs to be filled.
Well, I noticed that I gave you the parallel the other day. I noticed it when I was just looking at Declan's daily paper. It's about avocets, which are coming back, and they're doing quite well, but you've got to look after their eggs. And they found this barren mother. No, it wasn't an avocet, it was a curly, I beg your pardon. But anyway, one of those wadey things with a goat beak, and managed to get some eggs to hatch. And I think it's because I see proper relationships between educators and learners. I see barriers being put between them by far too prescriptive, far too rigid curriculum theories, and far too formal exam-based, far too much formally exam-based assessment of children's progress. In order to benefit, for example, well, I gave the example of Italian. So if one has learned Italian, rather beyond my level, which is to be able to order a beer and a coffee, and that's about it, and where's the station, then it's speaking it that's going to be the most important. The whole point, whether one's in business or academia and so on, is to be able to speak to one's colleagues in the same area, in that country, to be able to communicate with them properly. It's so important. And so that it isn't so very important that one has got an A star in Italian at some exam qualification. Because we all know people who get those qualifications, high grades, really good grades, and very good luck to them. It proves a lot about them. It proves that they've got the quality of being able to acquire theoretical knowledge and technical knowledge about the structure of the language. Fantastic. But that mustn't be there at the expense of actually learning the language and having the potential to enjoy its richness. And that's what I'm saying. I'm not saying, in a way, what I'm not saying is let's exterminate every last grey squirrel. I'm just saying let's make sure we give the reds a little bit more elbow, bushy tail.
Now, this series of programs, and long may they continue, started off really looking at the history of education, and particularly through your own grammar school logs, and it developed into where you gave your vision of the future. In fact, we haven't finished exploring that yet, but you had a lot of ideas and a lot of thoughts of innovation, and I mean, you're still a relatively young man, but you're coming towards the end of perhaps your tenure as a master at grammar school. Do you have inside you sort of thoughts of, gosh, if I could, I would set up a foundation, or I would set up a sort of a spin-off, so that I can actually bring not just what we talked about this morning, but some of your ideas, because you've got quite a few about how you think education should go. Is, in other words, the experience that you've got, which is considerable, do you have ideas and thoughts about how you can apply that to helping schools, teachers, and so on, think in these terms?
Yes, well, but yes, but no, as somebody once said. I don't really feel it in me to set up a Summerhill or a Steiner Foundation or anything like that, but nearly everything that's come out of the corporate mentality from largely, I'm afraid to say, the USA and other of these economic supergiants, the corporate mentality, you know, the fact that we'll have to wear lanyards and sort of bow to Big Brother and that sort of thing. And nearly everything about it is pretty loathsome. But one very good little grain that's come from that setup is the idea of sharing best practice. And I'm all in favour of that, absolutely all in favour of that. And it's something that people in education, including school and college leaders, have advocated, have tried to put into practice. And it's one of those things, just like the methods of actually at the chalk face delivering education. It's one of those things that runs up against this awful barrier of lack of time. The fact that professionals have so little time to do what they're expected to do. Many of it rather trite, many of it far from being anything but very, very marginally helpful to the learners. But they're just forced to do all this extra, largely administrative, largely bookkeeping sort of work. And that, I think, has got to be axed. 90% of that pressure on that own job be axed. The continual requirement to fill in needless or very, very faintly valuable assessments for every child, every 5 minutes, it seems. That's got to get so that improving educational relations with the students and pupils can be placed top of the list. And this idea of visiting other schools, visiting and speaking to other educators, that should be going on all the time. People should be buzzing around, visiting all the schools and colleges in their location, all the universities, all the primary schools. They should be free to do that frequently, often, and not just half a morning looking around prior or half a morning looking around Basel. That's not of any value at all. Actually getting under the skin of those places, what makes it tick. I've just thought of another thing that's just I'm sorry, my brain's a bit flitty this morning. Maybe if you did that, you could get rid of the odious Ofsted inspections as well, and just get teachers to write little reports of the schools and colleges they do. Right. So no new foundation, but developing methods by looking at what other people are doing.
are you able to look at this and sort of say, I would like to persuade some people to this way of thinking, so that I could, in a limited sense, to start off with, start to visit schools and universities, and as you say, even number 10. So you are actually being a pathfinder, as it were, and getting this movement going. Can you see openings for yourself to be able to do that?
I'd be interested in being involved. If somebody else got it going, yes, I'd be interested.
Yeah.
The thing is, it's another thing that it wouldn't be coming from nowhere. Heads often find time to primary school heads visit secondary schools and so on, and vice versa. Heads will visit other schools. Heads of faculty and department will sometimes just be able to do that, but so briefly that it can only be a very shallow impression. And I think really it's almost more important for the actual chalk-faced practitioners to be visiting one another.
Yes. I mean, you're talking about an immersive situation, and that does take time.
Yeah.
Practicing heads, no matter with the best will in the world, as you point out, would not have the time to do that in the totally immersive way that you just described. So how do you get to that nirvana, if you like, that lovely state where things are happening the way that you envisage them?
Well, I think we need cuts and we need spending, but not what you're thinking about. We need cuts in the workload of teachers that is unnecessary. The same is true in other professions as well. But the insane snowballing of administrative work has got to be really serious acts has got to go to that. It's just getting impossible. And the fact that other parts of the jobs of the main professions are irksome and stressful as well is largely down to the fact that the practitioners haven't got time to deal with those the most important parts of their work. So it's a question of cutting on that, and then therefore freeing up people's time. So that's the most important thing, and it's spending to get class sizes down. I really see that as very, very important. Yeah. The spending, and by this I do mean government spending, has got to be substantially increased fairly quickly to stop the awful exodus of professional educators from schools at all levels. Schools, colleges, primaries, junior schools, all of them have experienced recruiting difficulties because of the feeling of being undervalued and overworked, the professionals feel.
Now, you said if somebody else started it, I wouldn't mind being involved. My experience of life is that if you wait for somebody else, you wait forever. So the best thing is to grab the reins and actually get something going. Sometimes what you find is that then other people do start to do innovative things for which you can actually tag on. You don't necessarily have to stay the leader, but you ignite the thing. Can you see yourself igniting something like this?
You see, Keith, the difference between us really is demonstrated by the fact that we're sitting here. You have got this enterprise going over your time. You've been an igniter, as it were, of many of such enterprises and so on. So you're an energetic and active sort of a spirit. I think I'd better just come out with it because I've already given myself away. I'm essentially a lazy blight. But not so lazy that I wouldn't, put in a bit of work towards that. Trying to alter policy so that these improvements could be at least considered.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I hope that the ball will bounce so that you can get involved in something like this. I mean, it's very kind of you to say that I'm a Jew or whatever, but I mean, over the last few interviews that you've been in here, programs, you obviously are an innovator. You've got great ideas, and you feel passionately about them. And I just hope that one way or another something actually comes along, because you don't always have to kick-start things. Sometimes you fall into them. But I hope that something like that happens for you, because the vitality and the importance and necessity of the things that you've taught about has deeply impressed me. And I think that to see it sort of fester would be a great pity.
That's very kind of you in turn. Thank you. We're being nice to each other.
Yeah, yes, we are. Yes. Just to make up for all the time we yelled at one another in the past.
Right. Okay. Well, I won't just sit back then. I'll see what I can do.
Now, before we go, if we can just switch, because now we've since we last were here, we've had an election called, and of course, the politicians are all busy telling us what they haven't told us over the last 5 years is what they plan to do. Do you see strides forward from one party or another, depending on who forms the government, from the manifestos and the things that are said on hustings and so on? Are you optimistic for the educational sector from what you've heard so far?
Well, not in the short term, no, because I firmly believe that it's a money thing, that resources need to be substantial, not just a little bit of a couple of percent here. But there needs to be a substantial investment in education for real improvement to make it. At the moment, it's very much sticking plastering. And I don't see that happening. I don't think it's a political thing. I think it's an economy thing. You may or may not argue to what extent a sitting government is responsible for the economy. Clearly, they are to some extent. But we've got to have sufficient revenue to invest substantially in education. And I don't see much cause of optimism for that within the next 3 or 4 years in any case.
Yeah.
So, no, I'm afraid I don't.
Is there lobbying that can be done? Because it does seem to me that during my lifetime there has been the mantra that if you don't educate your population, you'll see your country or your organization or whatever slowly begin to fade away. And if this is what's needed, is there a thirst amongst any section of the political community that says, hey, let's get some excitement going again?
Well, the thing about politicians, one of the many things about politicians, is that they've all been to school. Yeah. They're all users of the shop. Many MPs have backgrounds as teachers. So there's lots of expertise. I don't think any of them would deny that the education system needs resources much better than it is at the moment and has been for a good number of years. It's a no-brainer. You know, it takes us back to the widening of the franchise in the 19th and 20th century, and the fact that every time a new section of the populace was given the vote, the politicians were taking, well, it was a leap in the dark, which is exactly how it's described. Because who knew how the new, newly enfranchised section of the population was going to vote? Now, we have, luckily, a wide franchise. We have a serious proposal to widen it by reducing the voting age to 16, which we spoke about briefly a few weeks ago. Didn't seem to go down too well with your other interviewees. But even if we don't do that, we've got a serious problem with the young people being disengaged from the political protest. A frightening number of young people are planning not to cast their vote and haven't registered. And I think that's absolutely appalling.
Yes.
And I think that a lot of people in schools feel that because they see the crumbling buildings and the foundations being dug on their former playing fields and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, that bothers me, I must confess. Tell me this, I am passionate about using small-scale television as an information vehicle. Apart from Jeremy Hunt, is no politician, British politician, has come remotely near to understanding that or trying to understand it. So, in other words, it doesn't matter whether there are people like myself being activists and so on. It just goes and it's swallowed, and the civil service gets hold of it, and so I'm left as a voice in the wilderness. Is the same sort of thing going to happen to your ambitions for education, or do you think that that there will be a movement that will say, "Come on, we've got to embrace this. We've got to break the mold"?
There should be, but groundswells of opinion often only come after some sort of crisis. I think we're getting quite close to that in education, I'm sorry to say. It really is, we're at a tipping point, I think, whereby we're going to have a lot of people failing because of poor recruitment and poor learning environments. I hope it doesn't need to come to that, but people ought to be making more of a fuss. Quite rightly, they make a fuss about their perception of the very poor service the NHS is capable of delivering to the best of its ability because of underfunding and unnecessary order. But the same should be happening in education, I think. It's not as if people aren't saying it. They're certainly saying it, but I don't know why politicians aren't listening.
Yeah.
Maybe they are, but they don't behave as though they are.
No, they don't, to be quite honest with you. I mean, I'm a curmudgeon. I'm in the sunset of my life. So I look back at the schools and I can go, and it's all to little avail. But inside me, I sort of think I could tell them how to change, which of course I couldn't. But I do have that feeling for change should be there, just the same as I do in my own sector. And I'm. You say, I understand that things have got to develop in education. Yes, but I don't have that passion for it that you would have any more than you would have a passion for television. So what I'm really sort of getting at is Is there a passion, even if it's fluttering around under the shelf at the moment, ready to burst out, so that you'll have evangelists? I mean, people like yourself sort of saying, "Come on, chaps, we've got to get this. We've got to get our act together."
Well, I think so. I think there probably is. And when one was trying to recruit chaps to go on the crusades, it was helpful that everybody, really everybody, 99.69% of the population of the Western European countries was Christian. And I mean, it's true that everybody, well, no, not quite everybody, but very high 90% of people in this country have been at school and feel that they've got a certain amount of knowledge of school. So there's certainly a recruiting ground.
Kit, we've been 46 minutes together, and it actually is taking us dangerously close to when Declan has got to open his pub. So we have to clear the decks. But I'd like us to take this up the next time you're in, which is what, 2 weeks' time.
Hope so, yes.
Yeah, because I think that it is a vital part of the debate. And I'm very pleased that we can be part of it, albeit we're very small. But out of little oaks, great or little acorns, great oaks grow. And I would hope that we would have at least some impact on the thinking. So thank you for the direction you've taken us in this morning, and let me ask you to follow it up next time you're here.
Pleasure, yes, pleasure.
Super. Kit Wood, in from the cold because of train strikes and so on and so forth. Delighted to see him back, and I hope that we'll be able to follow up on this line of chat, which to me is terribly important in 2 weeks' time. So for the moment, that's it for this Tuesday morning, and we'll be back tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock to talk about something else. Hopefully, we'll have one of the candidates in for the local list of people standing for election in Lewes district. And until then, toodle pip.